Hey everybody.
Evening.
Thank you for joining us for Serverless Office Hours. I'm Rob. My esteemed colleague Ben Smith is over there in the void. Say hi, Ben.
Hi, Ben.
Ben, what are we going to be talking about today? What's today's session?
This is a 60 minutes dedicated to step functions and building out workflows.
Awesome. Anybody who's seen Office Hours before or any of our series probably knows I love step functions. So I will be interrupting Ben relentlessly as he tries to accomplish something and provide
Okay.
value with
Yeah.
interjections that entertain me and hopefully also provide value for you. But look for
Yeah.
Ben's increasing frustration to manifest
Thanks for
itself.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
great.
welcome.
Brilliant. Perfect. Thanks for that, Rob. Exactly what I
Great.
want.
I look
Should we
forward
just
to
go?
it.
Should we just start building some step functions?
Yeah, man, there's nothing to it but to do it. This
Yeah.
is a builder's show. But real quick, the format, Ben's going to build. We're going to walk through. We are going to build something useful for you, a very nice project. And then we'll save some time at the end for questions. Ask your questions as we go along the way in the chat. We're all here to get your questions answered for you. And then we'll have that session at the end. So with no further ado, Ben, take us away,
Thanks
please.
very much. Right, I'll just share my screen here. So what I'm going to do is we're going to iteratively build a workflow using AWS Step Functions. So we'll start off with quite a simple workflow of just a couple of different states, and then we'll go around and iterate on that 3 or 4 or 5 times until we have a really useful production-ready workflow. And the way I'm going to do this is directly in code. We're not really going to dive into the console too much until we run our workflow towards the end. And what I'm going to be using is, this is Viz Studio code here, and I'm going to be using the AWS toolkit for Viz Studio code. And this has a really neat step functions integration with it, which allows you to build out your step functions in JSON and ASL and visualize as you build. So it's a great way of kind of modeling your workflow as you go. So what we're going to do, we're going to go over, build out a step function. I'm going to talk you through what it's going to do and how we can continue to improve it as we go. So is that big enough, Rob, for everyone to see, more or less? You tell me.
Yeah, that looks like a good starting point. People, if you can't see, let us know in the chat, please. I'm also going to drop a link to a blog on the Visual Studio's code support.
So in Viz Studio code, I'm going to go straight to the command palette and I'm going to search for step functions. And there's this option here to create a new step function state machine. If you've done some sort of computer sciencey degree, you'll be happy with the concept of a state machine, maybe even if you haven't done a computer science degree. For the purposes of this, really a state machine, it's a workflow, isn't it, Rob? It represents a point of a particular state at a particular point in time as it passes through our workflow, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and build a state machine. And here I'm given a bunch of different kind of starter options that I can use. So I'm just going to click on the Hello World starter, and I'm going to use JSON. And boom, there you go. There's a workflow in JSON using ASL, Amazon States language. And something I can do straight away, so this makes sense instantly, is to click on this little icon up here to render my graph. And you can see this is actually the workflow that this out-of-the-box example is ready to build for me. I'm going to just make that a little bit smaller, center that.
While you're showing that, this is a good point. You said if you're already familiar with state machines, you know what they are. If you're not, this is a good corollary of what they are, what you see on the right. A state machine or a workflow is a business process diagram as well. Now, there's specific field names, but you can think about that as you're building your applications. Anytime you have a formal modeled process, that's a good place that you should be thinking about step functions.
Nice. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to strip out all of these states or steps, if you like, because we're going to build this more or less from scratch. I just wanted to show off the impact of being able to render a graph directly in your IDE. And this will update as we go, and it will also validate our step function every time we add something to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to build something that actually, hang on, I'll flip this over. There's my GitHub repo. It's in here. So we're going to be building an application which is an automated security orchestrator. And we're going to start with a more simplified version of this first, and we're going to go over it until we have something looking a little bit more like the diagram here. So what it's going to do is it will invoke our workflow to start running. Excuse me. It will invoke our workflow to start running as soon as a new policy is created, a new IAM policy, Identity Access Manager. And what we have is we have the ability to add actions that we want to restrict. So by action, I mean maybe deleting an S3 object or deleting an S3 bucket. These are actions that we specify in our policies when we create policy. So what the simple version of this application will do is to check for restricted actions and remove them from the policy and notify administrator about that policy being created. Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to flip back to my work. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to hit on our keyboard. You're right there, Rob. We're going to hit Control Space.
I tried to hit the mute button. I apologize to everybody on the stream. I hit it. It didn't work.
Failed.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
We'll hit Control Space and Control Space. That gives us a bunch of options that we can use straight away to build out an example state. So I'm going to go down to something called Lambda Task State. And this is what's called a service integration. And what this state does is it allows us to invoke our Lambda function and configure what we send to that Lambda function as the payload. Then the output of that Lambda function will become the input of the next state. So what we're essentially doing here is we're managing state in a serverless application. So we're not holding our state in Lambda, we're moving it around our workflow. So this first Lambda function, I'm going to call it rollback. And I'm going to tell my workflow to start at rollback. I'm not going to worry too much about the resource name. This is where you would put the ARN or the ARN of your Lambda function and the function name and stuff like that. What we're doing here is we're modeling out the workflow. And this is something that Rob mentioned earlier, right? You don't necessarily at this point have to build all the resources that you're going to be orchestrating. We're looking at the sort of the path that our application takes in the workflow. And you might do this with another business user or a different stakeholder. You can very quickly create these workflows to understand what you're about to build. So I'm going to create my first Lambda function. It's going to be called rollback. And then I'm going to create another Lambda function. It's going to be called notify admin. And then I'm going to put a comma, and I'm going to go ahead and build another service integration with Lambda. And this is the one that is called notify admin. And then this will be the end of my workflow. Oh, what happened there? It'll be the end of my workflow. There. You can see straight away that updated. I have a very simple workflow with two Lambda functions. The first will check what the policy has just been created. It will compare that to a list of restricted policies, and it will roll that back, remove those restricted policies, and it will then send the output to another Lambda function, which will use the SDK to notify an administrator by placing a message onto an SNS topic that an administrator is subscribed to. Well, that's quite a lot going on there in two Lambda functions, right? It's good because they're slightly decoupled, but we can go a lot further and we can use a lot more services or a lot more features of our step functions to improve this. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do. The first thing we can do is we can use a different service integration, Rob. What would that service integration be? Any idea? Rob's gone to sleep. Never mind. It's going to be a service integration with SNS. Rob, you've frozen for me. You back?
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah. There's some technical difficulties there, y'all. We're still here. So
do I need to go back over anything?
No, I heard you the whole time, so I think we're good.
Okay, it's just you. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to replace that notify admin Lambda function with a service integration for SNS, right? And this is we're going to put this on a topic called notify admin. And this is doing an SNS public, right? We're going to say name for state. Ooh, going to give it the same name. And we're going to say this is the end of our workflow again. True. So what we've done there straight away if we stripped out an entire Lambda function and all of the code that would have been put in that Lambda function, all of the dependencies, the node modules, if it was in Node, for example, the SDK is all gone. We don't have to maintain any of that code now. And we've replaced it with about 8 lines of ASL or JSON. So that's good. That's one really good win. Another thing we can do is that this rollback Lambda function here, that's going to have to perform some kind of transform on the input payload, right? It's going to have to reorganize the payload that it receives in so that it can then compare it nicely to a list of restricted actions. So what we could do is it would be nice to strip that logic out of the Lambda function. So we know our Lambda function always gets exactly what it needs to then, in the format that it needs to then compare it to the restricted actions. And what we can do is we can use a special state. I'm going to press Control Space again, and we're going to use something called a pass state. Now, pass state can be handy for a couple of different things. It can be great for adding some logging into your workflow, or it can be great for parameter building, which is what we're going to use it for here. And I'm going to cheat a tiny bit here. I'm going to grab the actual definition from a semi-completed version here, because it's easier to explain a little bit quicker. So just put that in here. So what this is doing is it's saying in the payload of this state, there lives the policy document, the account ID, the region, and the policy, sort of metadata about the policy. And these are the only things really that the rest of my workflow is interested in. So I'm going to load that into these 4 parameters and pass that to the rollback state. So what that means is I can take that logic out of this Lambda function where it was before. And I'm going to now say that this will be the first state in my workflow. And I need a little comma there. There you go. So now I have a pass state here that's doing some text transform on the input payload to my workflow. I've stripped a bunch of code already out of my Lambda function. So now all it's doing is comparing against restricted actions and performing the rollback using SDK. And then I have a service integration for SNS that's publishing a message to my topic to notify my administrator.
Right.
Okay. I'm going a lot further. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to strip out some more logic from my rollback function and maybe split that in 2, right? It would be cool if I could use a choice state in my workflow. So my workflow can decide what I'm going to do, which path I'm going to take based on an action that my Lambda function gives it. I'll show you what I mean. So, and I keep looking up here, not for inspiration, it's because I have a board with each step drawn. So I'm just checking which one I'm going to do next. So
just got a picture of Eric Johnson up there. Anytime you want to think about serverless streaming, you just look up there to the right for motivation.
So I'm going to rename that to modify, because what that's doing is it's modifying our parameter string, right? And that'll be easier for me to keep track. And I'm going to make a new state, and this will be a Lambda function again. So I'm going to start with this little guy here, and I'm going to put my comment in straight away. And this Lambda function is going to be doing the making a decision, basically. So I'm going to call this to decide action.
Hey Ben, there's one thing I want to go over. I apologize, everybody. We're having a little bit of like network issues and connectivity. Ben, how did you get that code snippet in? And you may have already talked about it, but it's not showing up visually. So if you can just start it and leave it for a second, and we can talk about what's there.
I hold down Control and I press space. And then here are my options that I can put in, and I'm just using the arrow keys to tab up and down and hit return when I choose the state that I want to enter in.
Yep. And that's really a function of the Visual Studio, AWS Toolkit for Visual Studio Code.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly.
To help you out with those code snippets. Thanks.
Exactly. No problem. So I have my decide action Lambda function. And what this is going to do is it's going to compare the resource policy that it receives in the input payload with my list of restricted actions. So, for example, to delete an object in S3. And then it's going to produce an action for the next choice state to take, right? So the next state would be a choice. And I'm going to go Control Space. I'm going to go down to choice state. And this is a new one, like a new state that we haven't seen yet. And this is a really useful state because now I'm building decisional logic into my workflow, right? And this is going to receive something from my Lambda function above that will be called action. That'll be one of the kind of fields that it receives. And I'm going to look for, I'm going to do control space, when these are all the different things I can use to compare one thing to another, right? So I'm going to say when my action string equals remedy, then I want to roll back. Okay, and I can say when my action string equals ignore, then I will just, maybe I'll just notify admin, but I won't do the rollback. And the default, probably I should roll back, so it's nice and safe for the default. Put a comma there, and there you go. So now my workflow is starting to look like something that's really useful. What it's doing is the first Lambda function will transform the input payload, and then it will go to the next Lambda function, which will use that new sort of neat, tidy payload to decide if it needs to, what action to take next, whether it should roll back or allow this safe policy to go ahead and just notify the admin. Then my choice state is what makes that branch, and then I either roll back or I roll back and notify the admin. Okay.
Nice. Hey, before we go off that, I want to answer a question that's going to be easier to answer in context here. Arjun Gul 1995 asked, can we use dynamic variables in ASL? And you can in a couple ways. One, there is, as Eric Johnson was telling you in the chat, you can do variable replacement in your SAM template. But another way is, Ben, if you go back into that choice state, you've got string equals there. Can you show some of the other options that are available? Yeah. So this string equals path, string greater than path. Anything that's in there that compares it to a path is comparing it dynamically to some other value in the state. So it's a variable to variable comparison. That's an update to the states language from August of 2020. I'm going to drop a link to that blog post in here as Ben continues, and then we can go back and talk more about this during the Q&A if you want. But that's a good question. Thanks for it.
Nice. Okay. So what else can I do? What other, how else can I use step functions to simplify and strip logic out of my Lambda functions and place them into my step function code? So another kind of easy win really is to use some error handling built into my step functions, right? So I'm going to say that if my rollback Lambda function fails, I want to do some stuff. I want to sort of cater for that, right? So I'm going to press, gone into my rollback definition, I'll press control space, and I'm going to have some configuration for what to do in terms of retries. So I can actually retry based on certain errors, and I can configure to wait a certain number of seconds, back off rate. I can configure how many more times to attempt that, and I can do that for different types of errors. The other thing I can do, which is really handy, is I can create a catch configuration. So when all those retries are exhausted, I can say, okay, this isn't working. I'm going to send this to an SQS queue for later processing, so I don't forget about this rollback which failed, right? So I can catch that here, and I can say, when this happens, the next state should be SQS errors, and then I need to define that here, and I'm going to use a service integration SQS task state. There we go. And I'm going to call that SQS error, and I'm going to call that, I don't know, roll back error QUE. And I'll just put in here the entire payload because, well, because this isn't real. There we go. And then I'll say, after you've done that, probably after that, we would just end because that's about as far as we can go with that. True. That update. Beautiful. Look at that. So now I have built-in error catching. I have built-in retries. I could have put that in my Lambda function, but then it wouldn't really be visible to me. You know, it would. If you're building a workflow, it's best to handle all of those error configurations and trying and catch within the workflow itself, because then everything is visible to you, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's also declarative, and that's a big, like, this is a big part of the value proposition of step functions. That error handling is there. There's no dependency that it's relying on. There's no vulnerability that's going to be introduced there later. It's just, I want you to do exponential back off, try max 3 times, backing off by a factor of 2, and it always does it. It allows you to write simpler code too, only handling the happy path inside your code. so that everything is much more reviewable and easier to see, in addition to having it all in one place, like you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. So what else can I do to this? Okay, I've got a very good idea. I can add some human interaction or intervention with this, right? So let's say there's a situation where maybe I don't always want to roll back policies that are created with certain actions. Maybe I want a system administrator to check out that policy and check out that user and say, okay, I will approve or deny that policy. What that means is that our workflow has to kind of pause while it waits for that response from a user, because that is not going to be instantaneous. So what we need now is a way to send a notification to a user and ask them to approve or deny that policy change, and to pause the workflow while we wait for that response. So that's what we'll build in now, right? So we're going to do this. Let me check. I'm going to do this after the rollback. We're going to create something called ask admin, and then we'll put it down here, I think. And this will be a Lambda service integration. Ask admin. And so this will invoke our Lambda function. And in order for this to be a special invocation that kind of pauses until, or pauses the workflow for a period of time until that workflow is told to resume, we can, I'm going to hit Control Space here again, we can add something to it. It's called a pattern, and this is a wait for task token pattern. And this is the thing that tells this workflow to pause at this Lambda function before continuing, right? And then I'm going to do a little cheat again here. I'm going to grab something here. This is the important bit. Can I flip back? There we go. And to this Lambda function, I'm going to pass something called the task token. And this is a really special part of this whole process, right? So the task token is something unique to this workflow being paused. And in order to resume the workflow, something external to the workflow, another Lambda function perhaps, has to send a command to the workflow to resume running, and it has to provide back to it this special task token. Rob, you remember the special name for that command, don't you?
I do. You have two options. You have to import the SDK, the states component of it, and it's states.send task success or states.send task failure. And this doesn't have to be necessarily in AWS, right? This can be in any application running anywhere, as long as it has the proper permissions to make that SDK call. And then that will allow your workflow to continue. And
something else worth pointing out, this $$ here, this is a way of tapping into the kind of global context of the workflow. So by saying $, I'm saying I want to grab the task token from the workflow context, and I'm going to pass that into my Lambda function in a payload that's going to be called token. So then we're going to look at how
real quick, Ben, I'm just going to drop a link for the context object here in the chat as well, because there's a lot of stuff in there that you may find useful building your workflows, like number of retries, the time you entered into a specific state, the original input to the state machine, and other things that you might not be aware are there, but are really useful for you.
Thank you. Yeah, good idea. So we're going to look at how you resume the workflow in a minute, right? But we're not going to worry about that, because that's not part of this actual workflow. That's going to be an external thing that tells the workflow to resume. Let's assume that the user has done that resumption. They've passed the token back in, and they've said to either approve or deny this policy being created. So what we now need to do is to make a choice state which decides what course of action to take based on approving or denying. So we'll do that now. We'll call that users choice. Oops, choice. User chooses. There we go. Is that still wrong? I don't know. Probably is. And this is going to be a choice state. It's going to be called user chooses. And so this is going to receive something called action again, and I'm going to use string equals because it's nice and easy to see. And so this will be approve. This is where the user has said approve the policy, and then that's going to go to a task called approve. And then if the user says to deny the policy, we're going to look for that as well. And then that will go to something called deny. And probably the default, just to be safe, should be deny. Now we need to create 2 more states. Rob, you paying attention? What 2 states we need to create?
I am paying attention. We need to create. I'm not paying attention at all. I'm trying to answer a user's question, buddy. Yeah. I'm trying to help the people. I'm here for the people.
You're going to give me trouble.
We need to create a cat state and a dog state. What are your questions?
We need to create an approve state and a deny state, right? So the approve state is going to be a Lambda function, and that's going to do your start, sync, tongue twister. How do you say again?
Send states.send task success.
Oh, actually, no, it's not, is it? I'm wrong. No, ignore that. That's external to the workflow. The approve state is going to reinstate the initial policy, right? When our workflow was started. My bad. The good thing is that we didn't need to save that original policy in a database or anything because it's already part of the workflow state. It's being passed through each state as we go. So that's what this Lambda function will do. Then we're going to have a deny function or a deny state, which will be a pass state. And this doesn't need to do anything because we've already rolled back our function to something safer. So all this needs to do is basically end. There we go. And this one will need to end as well. Let's see if that loads. Does it load? Oh, something it doesn't like. That's got to be called deny. And what? Oh, that's got to be a capital E. And I probably, there we go. So there you have it. There's our completed step functions. So just to recap, this is invoked or triggered when a new policy is created. This is a Lambda function which does some transform on the input payload to sort of tidy it up a bit. Then, or a pass state that does that, sorry. Then a Lambda function is invoked to decide what course of action to take. The choice state is what branches on that course of action. So if it finds a bad action in the policy, it will roll that back to something safer. And then it will ask an administrator if they want to approve or deny this policy. The administrator will action that with an approve or deny and pass back the task token to the workflow. And then the workflow will perform that action and that will end. Okay, so we said at the beginning, right, that this is just mapping out the workflow that orchestrates all of these services. We've got SQS queues, we've got SNS, we've got Lambda, we've got a bunch of IAM policies in here, a bunch of different functions. We haven't created any of those resources yet. We've just orchestrated how they're going to be, or decided how they're going to be orchestrated and how the state will pass through them. So we probably don't have enough time to build all of those resources, right? But if we were going to do that, we would probably, or we should do that using a framework. Now, my go-to is AWS SAM, Serverless Application Model. It's a framework for building serverless applications. And it just so happens, Rob, that I made one earlier, and that's what I've referred to a couple of times here.
Nice.
So, thanks very much. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a git pull on this SAM template. Maybe someone can put the URL to this repository in the chat for us, Rob or Eric, please. And I'm going to do a git pull, and then I'm going to do a deploy on this template, and we're going to run through and see what we just built in action, right? So I'm going to delete all of this. We don't need that anymore. And what's the code URL? I need this. I'm going to do a, you can go away, do a git clone.
There you go.
Yeah. And that's there. I'm going to go into that. Where is it? This is tiny. Very difficult when your font is so big, isn't it?
Yeah, but you got to have it so the people can read it, Ben.
It didn't even know where that was. Here it is. CD. There we go. Let's make sure I'm there. I am inside it. Okay, so before we deploy this, or maybe we should deploy it first, and then we can talk through what it is. So I'm going to do a SAM build and a SAM deploy. Deploy spelled correctly, guided. So that's
Eric
now building
Johnson
all.
will note that Ben used the -G shortening of the -- guided correct way to run
A bunch
SAM
less
deploy
things
- guided.
to type. Yeah, absolutely. So that's
There's
now
no one right way, but that's the right way.
that's the quickest way for sure. So now this is the wizard, right? That's sort of wizard, the walkthrough that's going to help me deploy my SAM template. It's got a stack name suggested for me. I'll go with that one, US East 1, sure. This is the admin email address that I'm going to use. That's my email address. And here are the restricted actions that I want to check for. So this is where I can add other actions, but I'm just going to stick to the default delete bucket and delete object action on S3. I don't care about confirming my change. And then everything else, I want SAM to just go ahead and do its thing. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. So that's now going to go ahead and deploy. And I want to have a quick look at this template together. So here's my SAM template, right? And there's a few things to sort of note in here. The first one I think that's really cool is this is the SAM template definition for my state machine or my step functions workflow. And you'll notice it's tiny. And that's because of the way that it's tiny. Yeah.
It's tiny. Where'd all that Amazon States language go, Ben?
Well, it goes into this definition URI inside a folder called state machine and inside a file called state machine ASL JSON. And it's over here. And it's this. And you can still do the render graph. And here's a pretty similar thing to what we just built, right? And this has some other really cool things. You'll notice here, this is a validate policy. I mean, it's useful that I've called these slightly different names. Sorry about that, but it does the same thing. This one's called validate policy, and this is the resource ARN. Now, obviously, we can't hard code our ARN into here because we don't know what it is. We haven't deployed it yet. So what we do instead is with my template, we use this definition substitutions field. What do you call it? Field? Probably not field, is it? And we grab the validate policy ARN of that Lambda function, and we put it into this sort of variable that we then access in our SAM template. And that's what we do for our topics and our Lambda functions. And every time we need an ARN, we use this definition substitution. So that's very important for building with SAM and step functions. Now, the other thing that I wanted to draw attention to is we mentioned there is a Lambda function that exists that is external to the workflow. That's really important because that's what tells the workflow to resume with the task token, right? And the best way to visualize that is in this little graph here, or this little diagram. So when we send an email or we add a message to an SNS topic, which a user is subscribed to, that sends an email to that user. It also generates an API gateway URL. And part of the API gateway URL, there's a parameter called token. And that is our special task token. So then when a user clicks on the URL for approve or the URL for deny, that invokes a Lambda function that branches to approve or deny with that task token and tells our step function workflow to resume. Okay, so that should have deployed by now, right? I'm going to go back to...
Should. It's pretty quick, usually.
One thing we have to do here, we have to confirm that I want to subscribe to that topic which the stack just created. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, confirm subscription. Good, I'm confirmed. So I go to my CloudFormation stack and I should see it here somewhere. Here we go. Here's all the resources that comprise that stack. And I'm going to go straight into the meat, straight to the state machine resource. And hopefully look exactly like what it did in the IDE just now when it loads. You'll notice that there's 0 execution so far because we haven't created any policies since we deployed it. And if I edit this workflow, you can see the definition will appear here. And yeah, that looks identical to what we just saw in the IDE. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try it out. I'm going to create a policy.
Hey, Ben.
Add policy. Go on.
I can't see your screen anymore. It's sort of frozen. I don't know if it's a network thing. Can anybody else out there see it? Everybody else is fine? Can everybody else see what Ben has on screen?
Ben is lagging. Yeah. Oh no. Shall I
See a white browser. Yeah, that's
like
where I
turn
am
it off and on
too.
again? Classic.
Yeah, turn it on, turn it on and off again.
Okay.
Oh,
Let me
he's gone.
try that. How's that?
Oh, he's back. Oh, it's not back. I tell you what, because
I
there's
can
always
hear
a backup. Let's I've got that URL too. Let me see, it's a browser, but the tab is empty. Why don't I? Yeah, you're gone. Let me clone it on mine. See if we can go forward that way. We're just gonna do it live, man. We're gonna do it live, you know?
winging it.
Winging it. Code.
So you can still hear
dot.
me, you just can't see my screen.
Okay, I can see your browser now. Yeah,
Oh,
I can see you creating a policy. That's back.
should we try it?
Try it. Try it. Drive on. If not, I've got a
Let's
backup
do
here
it.
for you. So
Let's give it a go. So I'm going to create a policy that's got some S3 actions, some naughty S3 actions, which I want to forbid. One was to delete an object, wasn't it? Another was to delete a bucket, and I'll put some other in there for good measure. And because this is a bad policy, I'm just going to allow that on every resource. Fine.
yeah, since I know what this is supposed to look like, I'm gonna go ahead and say that I think this is frozen again, mate. So
Okay.
let me see if I can get in here real quick. Everybody, appreciate you bearing with us here. We want you to be able to see this stuff actually work. In the meantime, it's probably a good time to ask some questions. Throw anything in the chat that you want to know. So put this in US West 1. Okay, let me share.
You doing a git pull on that repo, Rob?
I've already got it. I just need to get a little console for the people here. And I'm going to have to deploy it myself.
Mm-hmm. You have a CloudTrail enabled?
AWS Management Console. Do I have CloudTrail enabled? Oh, no, I don't. Is that a requirement?
Yeah.
Well, shucks. Shucks.
Yeah, because you need your event bridge to grab that event and add it to your bus, right?
Let's run it. I'm not convinced that I don't, because that's the default event bus in the user's account. So let me just,
Okay.
where am I? SAM build and SAM deploy -- guided. No, y'all can't see this, so this isn't going to be very interesting for you, but this should go pretty quickly. Let's see where I put it. We'll put it in US West 1. Stack name, US West 1. I'm going to send you the emails anyway, so, you know. Your email address in there.
It actually has instructions on how to deploy and test this as well, right? So that all the code is there, all the template is there. Hopefully you've got better bandwidth than me.
Yeah. Unable to upload artifact. Well, I've run into something myself here. So
brilliant.
Yeah. Let me stop mine. Maybe you can drive on, and maybe yours will come back. Just keep putting it in there, and then people can at least see the fact that the workflow runs. It'll come up eventually. I have faith.
Okay.
In the meantime, that's a nice brick wall.
I've created a policy which has an action to delete an object in S3 and to delete a bucket in S3, right? I'm going to create this policy. And that will straight away invoke my workflow to start, and it will send the payload to that workflow. Yeah, this is very slow. There we go. Right, so here's the policy that I just created. And you'll notice that it says version 1 does not exist. So it's already been rolled back. It's already been removed. And if I go to the executions of my workflow, you should see that something is currently running. And it loads. Here we go. You can see that it's done the validate policy. So we can look at what the input for that state was. All this. It's quite a lot of stuff. Oh, modify state. Sorry. This is the input that my workflow started with. The output, after I tidied that up with parameter building, is much smaller, much tidier. That's what then gets passed to my Lambda function here. My Lambda function then produce a new output that says action remedy because we found some bad actions in that policy. Then the action that's chosen is to revert the policy. So if I now go over to the IAM policy and click refresh, there should be a new version here. When it loads, you still seeing my screen or nothing?
It's locked on the create policy screen there. So.
Oh really? Oh, that's way behind.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I couldn't get it to deploy mine. All right.
I guess we'll have to call it on the showing the workflow running, right? Because
there we go. Hey, it just made a bump, so we can see version 2 now, right, of your policy that you were talking about before.
Let me go back to this. So can you see this? The step function graph?
No.
No. Okay.
Like NoSQL Know-How said, you're running about 1 frame every 30 seconds now on video. So,
so you have to take my word for it. The step function graph has paused on the ask user. It's waiting for me to tell it what to do next. And I'll put everyone out of their misery. I'll tell it to. So I'm now opening my email client, and I have an email with a API gateway URL with a link to approve and a link to deny. And I'm going to click on approve. And that's going to invoke my Lambda function that uses the wait for task token to resume my step function. So this is what I've just clicked on. Up here, you can see the task token. It's a bit rough and ready, but it works nicely. And so what that would have done now is if I go back to my workflow, you can see that it's found a state, which is to approve, and it's finished nicely. And if I go back to the IAM policy and refresh that, it will have created a new version, and it would have reinstated the original policy that triggered the workflow in the first place, because I said, go ahead and approve. So here's the version 3 that's created. Anyone can see it. And here you are, the original policy.
Yeah, again, I would just go back to... Yeah, it's showing now where you're back to the original policy. So you can see it's showing version 3 now. Again, everybody, the apologies for the connection issue we're having here, but that URL, the repo that we've shared with you, has thorough instructions on how to deploy and run this in your own account as well. So you can walk through the example, and you'll be able to see what Ben just showed you.
It's even got a one-click deploy using serverless application repo, SAR. So be really straightforward to deploy that and give it a try.
Good.
Let's remove that. Do you have any good questions?
Every question is a good question, Ben.
Any bad questions?
There are no bad questions. So let me scroll back through, because we had quite a few over the course of the episode here. We talked about dynamic variables early on. We raised that and we blocked. And we showed you eventually both versions of that. One, the string equals path and all the other path operations that do variable to variable comparisons. We showed you the ASL improvements blog for that as well. And then when Ben showed you the SAM template, that's when you see the dynamic ARNs and other values being injected by SAM at deploy time. So hopefully that addresses your question for you.
Here's a good question for you, Rob. I'm
going to get that. I'm scrolling down the other direction. John Cartwright asks, I have an asynchronous process, e.g. an Amazon Athena query that I'd like to make appear as synchronous. Would step functions be an appropriate solution? Largely depends on what you mean by appear as synchronous. Step functions does have a service integration for Athena. You can start queries and get query status from within the workflow so that you know when something is completed. If you're using express workflows and those complete in under 30 seconds so that you can get it back out through API gateway, then that could appear as a synchronous end-to-end process. But you got several limitations along the way there that you would need to hit. It's important to understand you need to do that loop yourself, because the Athena service integration starts the query and then it's a response return. It moves on once the query is successfully going. So it's going to be up to you to wait and back off and check it.
You just mentioned express workflows there, Rob. I don't think we've really mentioned the difference between standard and express workflows so far.
Hey, Ben,
have we?
What's the difference between standard and express workflows? Oh no, Ben froze as soon as I asked him a saucy question. Oh, he's back. Ben, what's the difference between standard and express workflows?
Right. Well, there's a couple of key differences. Okay. So standard workflows you can run for up to a year, whereas express workflows run for up to, I believe, is it 5 or 15 minutes?
It's 5 minutes. Up to 5 minutes.
But the other key difference is the transition rate is much faster on express workflows. So if you have a workload that is requiring a really fast transition, really high throughput of events, then you might want to go with express workflows. But if you have a workload which has to run for a long time and maybe needs a human intervention like we saw today, then you would maybe want to look at standard workflows. And there's a cost difference as well. So express workflows are more cost effective too, because the logging options are a bit different.
Yeah. One other key difference when building with them, standard workflows are exactly once execution. Step functions workflows are at least once execution. So you need to take care to handle that idempotency there. We have a question that I don't understand, so I'm going to risk it, and I'm going to put this question on the screen. Let's see if this is a good idea or a bad idea. Who knows? What about Lost Ark in AWS? I only understand this question from the concept of Indiana Jones, Temples of Doom, and other great movies from my childhood. So I'm going to need a little clarification. If there's clarification at the bottom, I'm happy to try to answer this question.
Yeah, same. I'm not sure what that is.
We went through some feature requests around step functions. I'm glad to see. Thank you to our team members for picking those up and taking those back to the product team. There was a question about, I'm going to put this up on the screen for people that might be in a different channel. Is there a way to get a graph preview in Visual Studio Code when composing step functions with the CDK? And the answer to this was, we all think that you can do it by using an external ASL file in the CDK, or by running CDK synth, which would generate the ASL as part of the CloudFormation stack that it prints out. But as none of us are CDK experts, none of us are 100% on that. So would love it if you could go out and try and let us know what happens. Be fantastic. There's another one down here. A couple of y'all are wrong about using short flag options. You should always type out the long flag option.
Fair enough.
Let's see. Where was he? Can we provide a max parallelism value through a variable for dynamic parallelism in step functions? Do you know the answer to this off the top of your head, Ben?
No, I would have guessed that you can through the substitution that we looked at earlier when you're using the SAM template. But I haven't tried that. Do you?
As of today, I believe the answer is no, because there is a max concurrency, but not a max concurrency path. And the pattern would be, if it was dynamic, then you would be able to say max concurrency path equals $ dot whatever path you want. Now, I'm going to use some time now to check my work on that and confirm. But my belief is that since there is no max concurrency path, that there is no dynamic version of it. We will see. Eric Johnson threatening to join the stream with his bad opinions about flags. Bring it.
There's one more question here, Rob.
Long form. One more question. You want to put it up on the screen here? What did I miss?
Sure. This one. I don't think we got to that yet.
How to avoid failing in execution if a specific property is not present in the response and included in a result selector or an intrinsic function. So this is, say, for example, you run a Lambda function, you expect it to return 3 fields, ID, name, price. And price doesn't come back, only ID and name do. And your next field in the state expects that to be there. So you have, as part of the ASL improvements, you have if exists, where you can check for the presence of a variable in the path. And then it can be there and be null. You have if it's null. And those are all part of the ASL improvements. So that's how I would do that. First, if those are critical values, you need to check that those values are there before you attempt to access them with other parameter builders, task states, etc. That link back in here. And yeah, so going back on the other one, I've checked my work, and the max concurrencies field's value is an integer that provides an upper bound on how many invocations of the iterator may run in parallel. So it's not a path, but that is feedback that we've heard before, that it would be useful to define max concurrency differently and programmatically. So I will add this to that feedback. Thank you for it. What else? Did I miss anything?
I don't think so. I've just been scrolling through there. I think you got them all. Yeah.
Okay, let me. Yeah, is present. Sorry, if you go to that blog post that I gave you, there's updates to choice state. Is present is that existence test to check if something exists in the path. And then from there you have is null, is string, is numeric, is Boolean, is timestamp, so that you can get type guarantees about it as well before you attempt to process it somehow. And then from there, if it fails, if is present is false, then you go down one branch with a choice state. If is present is true, you go down the other branch with the choice state. And you can use this in the reverse case as well, right? So you can check is present some extremely deep error code function, right? And then if it's there, then you know you need to go down to a nested workflow, for example, for some other specific case of handling, but normally you'll just proceed past it. Cool. Is there a way? Yeah, sorry, Dan, MBA, I saw this question and I forgot to answer it. I apologize. Is there a way to get an image file of the state diagram from VS Code? Other than a screenshot, I do not know. And this is one that I've heard as well, like programmatic generation of the diagram as an SVG or a PNG. I've heard that before. Unfortunately, yes, it's, if I'm imagining where you want to go with this as part of like a CI/CD deployment process so that you always have it, although that wouldn't be in VS Code.
Rob, you can get that from the console, can't you? A screenshot.
I don't think you can export it as a PNG. I think same thing. You have to take a screenshot.
You can export a PNG, export graph to PNG from the AWS console.
Oh,
so I wonder if there's I don't know if there's like an API command to do that though.
So then I'm looking at the preview in Visual Studio Code. AWS render state machine graph shows you that preview. I don't see a way to do it in the AWS toolkit for Visual Studio Code, but since Ben says there's a way in the console and I don't have my console open, I'm gonna trust that Ben knows what he's talking about.
Export drop down in the console, the graph inspector, SVG or PNG.
Awesome. Okay. Then I will take it back to them to maybe pull that into the toolkit in the future. Hey, Bim, what Visual Studio Code theme are you using?
I don't know. How do you find that out? I don't think it's something I've ever changed.
No? I don't know. I use the default one. It looks like you. It does look a little different from mine.
Don't know. I'll tweet it later.
I found when payload limit exceeds the 256K, Catch is not able to detect this error. Is there any solution for it? I don't know. I don't know how you would recover from that because it would require you to be in the, like intentionally chop your state somehow. So at this point, I would consider that a failed execution because you overran it. I think you would have to know what size what size output your functions, et cetera, generate and stay within it. Because how would you know which part? You can't pull in like a 1 megabyte payload to then cut down to 256, because then you could pull in a gigabyte payload or a terabyte payload, right? So there's no real way to work around that as of today. You can calculate the sizes and limit your like map states or parallel executions to stay underneath that. Again, the general pattern is put all your data into an S3 bucket or DynamoDB or some other durable storage and only store references to it in the state to help you avoid running into those payload limitations, which today are 256 kilobytes. How is step functions priced? What are state transitions? And what should I think about for cost optimization? I'm going to refer to the step functions pricing page here because they're priced differently for standard workflows and express workflows. Standard workflows has been talked about are priced according to state transitions, which is when you go through that diagram that Ben showed us, each time you're hitting a new state, that is a transition. The express workflows are priced on a model more close to how AWS Lambda charges you, where it's an invocation runtime in memory. And I'm looking for the specific numbers on this. It's 25 thousandths of a cent, or 2.5 cents for every 1,000 state transitions, as always, depending on your region. And then express workflows are $1 per million requests, and 0.00, that's just the inverse of that. And then it's a gigabyte second charge for compute that's consumed, same as AWS Lambda. And what should you think about for cost optimization? Well, service integrations. One service integration is one state transition is, 2.5 per thousand cents per thousand. But if instead you run a Lambda function, that's a state transition plus a Lambda function to do the same thing. So you're paying for that twice. So service integrations are, in addition to helping you create better, more resilient workflows, they're also saving you money. So that's one thing.
Something I think is really cool about standard workflows as well is you don't pay for a waiting, do you? So if your workflow is waiting for a user to intercept, like the one we tried to demonstrate, that's not costing time. That wait time is not something you're billed for. So
right.
That's a really cool way of using standard workflows as well.
Yeah. And so you talked about the optimizations on invoking express workflows as well. You're building in the opposite direction there. You want to get it invoked and completed as fast as possible to minimize your cost because you're paying for time. Whereas with a standard workflow, you want to get it right in the fewest number of steps, but not worry about how long from a clock time that takes to execute. Ben's theme is Cent84. Nice. A little customizer.
Must have changed it one day.
Yeah. Okay, did we miss anything?
Don't think so.
Seems Cent84. We got somebody sharing a blog here. Thoughts on cost optimization. I cannot vouch for the quality or content of that article. I have not read it myself, but since we are on a couple different channels here, you may want to check out price optimization for step functions there. Thank you, Grimbo, for sharing that one.
It's a good question, Rob. It's not just about step functions. What is a good ramp-up plan to get into AWS serverless?
Yeah. EDJ Geek hits it head on the nail there, right? Start with serverlessland.com, but one fewer S's up front there. That's where we have serverless. I'll put the link in here again for everybody. Serverlessland.com aggregates all the serverless resources that we have. And again, those learning paths that he calls out are going to be good for you to understand how to get started with specific services and with specific applications in general. Also, Eric's being a little modest there. Sessions with SAM is his series is a great way to get started because it puts you in with a framework building real applications with real use cases right away. So definitely check out Sessions with SAM. Let me make sure I got the right link for that.
we'll be creating actually a lot of content around getting started for sort of 100, 200 level users, beginner users over the next couple of months as well.
I dropped the link to that in the chat. This is a good one. Now that we have time. How is Apache Airflow different from Step Functions? Well, we have Amazon has a managed workflows for Apache Airflow, or MWAA as a service. Apache Airflow uses DAGs, or directed acyclic graphs, with sort of plugins and components to accomplish tasks along the way. They're more generalized computing tasks, more generalized and generalizable, because it's not an AWS specific platform. Apache Airflow is all Python, so you have to write your workflows in Python. Step Functions is all ASL, so you write your workflows in the Amazon States language. For tight integrations with AWS services and like smooth, seamless processing and performance, I would argue, I would do Step Functions. If you already have an existing investment in Apache Airflow, or you're a really good Python developer, then I would recommend taking a look at Amazon Managed Workflows for Apache Airflow, MWAA. Thanks for that one. All right.
I think we're there.
Thank you all for joining us. It's 2 o'clock. I hope nobody's on after us. If they are, I apologize for taking up their time. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Ben, for a great session. Again,
sorry about the technical issues.
It's not in our control. Thank you all for your patience and bearing with us for it. Serverlessland.com for this and more resources on serverless learning. We'll see you all next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.